The Dutiful Daughter. Once upon a time, in the land of Korea, there lived a merchant and his wife. They were wealthy, but had no children. Every day, they prayed for a child, hoping God would bless them with one. 16 years passed after their marriage, and they were now middle-aged. One night, the wife dreamed she was walking through a beautiful garden filled with flowers and fruits. Birds were chirping sweetly. As she walked, a shining star suddenly fell into her lap. When she awoke, she told her husband, "This dream must mean that God will grant us a child, one as bright and beautiful as a star." The merchant could hardly believe it, but just as she had said, a baby girl was born to them. She was so lovely that everyone who saw her stood in wonder. Though the couple had longed for a son, their disappointment soon faded, because the girl was not only beautiful, but also wise and kind-hearted. They named her Sim Chung. Tragically, when Sim Chung was still a child, her mother passed away. Her father was overcome with grief, and soon, from weeping too much, he lost his eyesight. His business fell into the hands of dishonest servants who stole from him and wasted his wealth until he became very poor. At last, he had nothing left, not even enough to feed himself and his daughter.
One day, filled with sorrow, the blind man wandered far from home. Not seeing where he was going, he stumbled and fell into a deep pit. Unable to climb out, he feared he would die there. Just then, he heard footsteps passing by and cried out for help. The man who stopped was a greedy and cunning official who often passed that way during his walks. Looking into the pit, he saw the blind man and called out, "Who are you? How did you fall in?" The merchant replied, "I am a poor blind man. Once I was a wealthy trader, but I lost both my sight and fortune. Please, kind sir, pull me out before I perish here." The official smirked. "That would be foolish of me. I might fall in myself. But if you promise to offer 150 sacks of rice to the temple goddess, I'll bring a rope and pull you out safely." He didn't want the rice for the goddess. He wanted it for himself. He thought, this man must know other rich people. If he begs them for temple offerings, they'll give. But if he says it's for me, no one will help. When the poor blind man heard the condition, he groaned. "How could I ever promise such a thing? I am too poor even to feed myself and my daughter." The official perked up. "You have a daughter?" "Yes," said the blind man softly. "She is the most beautiful girl in all the land, as good and wise as she is lovely." The greedy man smiled slyly. "Listen, if you promise to give the rice, I'll help you out, and I'll even find a way to make your daughter famous and honored throughout the country. You'll regain your sight, your wealth, and your name." The poor man tried to refuse, but the official kept threatening him. Finally, in fear and desperation, the blind man agreed.
The official fetched a rope, threw one end into the pit and pulled him out. Then he said sternly, "Remember, 1 month from today I'll send my servants. Beg, borrow, or steal, but have those 150 sacks of rice ready. If you fail, I'll have you beaten and thrown into prison. That will be worse than dying in that pit." Broken and sorrowful, the blind man returned home, his heart full of fear and regret. As soon as his daughter saw him, she realized that something terrible must have happened. She asked, "Father, what's the matter?" At first, he tried to hide it, fearing she would become frightened. But she kept insisting so earnestly that in the end, he had to tell her everything. When Sim Chung heard what promise her father had made, she was truly terrified. "Oh no," she cried. "How can we ever gather so much rice? You know very well that even the handful I cooked today was given by our kind neighbors out of pity." The poor blind man began to weep. "You are right, my child," he said. "It would have been better if I had died in that pit instead of living to face prison. How can I ever fulfill a promise to give 150 sacks of rice?" So the blind man began to beg for alms. He went door to door telling people his sorrowful story and asking for rice. But the villagers were poor themselves. They barely had enough to feed their own children. How could they give him any? Days passed, and at last the appointed time arrived, the day when the official servants were to come for the rice. Yet the poor blind man hadn't even managed to gather one single sack. He and his daughter sat in despair. Sometimes the blind man groaned aloud, dreading the beating and imprisonment he was sure to face. He now knew the truth. The official was greedy and cruel, and mercy could never be expected from him. Meanwhile, in another city not far away, there lived a very wealthy merchant. He owned many ships that sailed to foreign lands for trade. But the merchant had grown so proud and arrogant of his riches that he began calling himself the Prince of the Sea. This boast greatly angered a mighty sea spirit who lived deep beneath the very waters where his ship sailed. To punish the merchant's pride, the spirit raised a mighty storm. Many of the merchant's ships were destroyed. Some crashed upon the rocks, while others barely made it back to the harbor they had departed from. The losses were so great that sailors now refused to work for him. The merchant began to fear he would soon be completely ruined. In his distress, he summoned many astrologers and sorcerers to seek their advice on how to remove this curse. After studying their books and consulting among themselves for a long time, the wise men finally said, "We have discovered the cause of your misfortune. Your pride has angered a mighty sea spirit. He is the one destroying your ships. There is only one way to calm his wrath. If a young maiden, of her own free will, offers herself as a sacrifice to him, the spirit will be satisfied and will trouble you no more. Otherwise, every one of your ships will perish, and your downfall will be certain." When the merchant heard this, he was struck with despair.
"There's no way I can be saved now," he cried. "Even if I offer the greatest reward, I am certain there is not a single maiden in all of Korea who would willingly sacrifice herself to a sea spirit. What good would such a reward be to the girl who would be thrown into the sea in exchange for it?" However, at the request of his steward, who managed all his affairs, an announcement was made throughout the kingdom. Whoever would volunteer to offer herself as a sacrifice to the sea spirit would make her family rich and honored beyond measure. The steward said, "Perhaps there will be a girl who values her family's happiness more than her own life." The merchant agreed to this idea, and so the proclamation was made in every city and village. Messengers went far and wide, beating their drums to spread the news. One such messenger reached the village where the blind man and his daughter lived. On that very day, the cruel official's servants were to arrive to collect the 150 sacks of rice. The herald stood not far from their house, loudly announcing that the family of any maiden who offered herself as a sacrifice to the sea spirit would be richly rewarded. As he was about to leave, Sim Chung, standing nearby, asked a woman, "What was that man announcing?" The woman laughed and said, "Who could ever believe that any girl would willingly sacrifice herself to a sea spirit just so her family could receive a reward?" But upon hearing this, Sim Chung ran after the herald and caught hold of his robe. "Wait," she cried. "You just said that your master will give a great reward to the family of the girl who offers herself to the sea spirit. Will he really give such a family 150 sacks of rice?" "More than that," replied the herald. "My master is a very rich man. His reward will be worthy of his wealth." Sim Chung said softly. "Then I will go with you and give myself up as a sacrifice. Only let me first go and say farewell to my father." The herald was overjoyed to have found a maiden for his master. "Yes, yes," he said, "I will wait while you take your leave." But when Sim Chung returned home and told her father of her decision, the poor blind man was heartbroken. He began to weep bitterly and tore his clothes in despair. "No, never," he cried. "I will never allow you to make such a sacrifice." Yet her daughter gently comforted him, saying, "Father, have you forgotten what the official said? He told you that if you offered rice to the goddess, our fortunes would improve, and our honor would rise throughout the land. We must trust that the gods will protect me. If I am cast into the sea, what harm can come if it is the will of heaven?" Hearing these words, her father grew calm, and though his heart ached, he gave his consent. When the neighbors heard of Sim Chung's decision, they gathered to see her. Though they praised her for her filial devotion, they could not hold back their tears at her tragic fate. Then Sim Chung went away with the herald, who hurried to bring her before his master, afraid that if the girl were given time to think, she might change her mind and withdraw from her promise. When the herald reached the merchant and told him that he had found a maiden willing to be sacrificed, the merchant could hardly believe it. Does she truly understand what she must do, and is she still willing to go through with it? The herald assured him, "Yes, my lord, she fully understands and is even joyful, knowing that her father will be richly rewarded." When Sim Chung was brought before the merchant, her beauty, grace, and gentle manners filled him with pity. He was so moved that he even ordered she be sent back to her father. But Sim Chung firmly refused. "No," she said, "I came here for a purpose. I made a promise and I will not break it. I only ask for one thing, that my father receive 150 sacks of rice immediately." "So be it," the merchant replied. "Rest assured, I will keep my promise exactly as you wish." He then ordered that the rice be loaded onto donkeys and sent straight away to the blind man's home so that Sim Chung could be at peace. After the rice was dispatched, Sim Chung was taken to a chamber filled with fine garments and jewels. Attendants dressed her in silks and adorned her arms and neck with sparkling diamonds. When her adornment was complete, her beauty was so radiant that even the maids wept softly, thinking of the fate that awaited her. A boat decorated with garlands was prepared. Musicians were seated inside, playing soft and sorrowful tunes as the boat sailed toward the place where the sailors were to offer Sim Chung as a sacrifice. Though anyone else would have been terrified, Sim Chung's heart was calm. She kept thinking of her father, now free from the cruel official's grip, and she felt happy rather than afraid. When the boat reached the place where the sea spirit was said to dwell, Sim Chung leaned over the edge and looked into the water. It was deep and green, but she thought she saw a shining palace beneath, with towers that glimmered like crystal and sea nymphs beckoning her to her. She bent lower and lower, and it seemed as though some invisible power was drawing her down. Soon she slipped beneath the surface, sinking deeper and deeper, until she vanished from sight. The sailors rowed the boat back to shore and reported that the sacrifice had been accepted. The merchant rejoiced, certain that now his ships would again sail safely across the seas, though his heart still ached for Sim Chung, whom he believed had perished. But the truth was quite different. After sinking deep beneath the waves, Sim Chung traveled a great distance through the sea until she came upon the underwater realm of the Sea King. The surroundings were wondrous beyond imagination. Seaweed swayed like tall trees, and bright fish darted through the water like birds. Flowers bloomed in colors no human eye had ever seen, and countless glittering shells covered the ground. Before her stood a palace of pearl, inlaid with gems that shone through the water like twinkling stars. As she marveled at this sight, the great doors of the palace opened, and a procession of maidens came out to greet her. They were all dressed in green, and though many were beautiful, their skin, eyes, and hair were green as well. They spoke in a strange tongue, but soon Sim Chung understood that they had come to escort her to the Sea King, who was awaiting our arrival. She realized this must be the sea spirit himself. Though she was afraid, she followed without hesitation, for this was the very purpose for which she had come. They led her through many halls, until at last she stood before the Sea King, who sat on a crystal throne. His body was green, his crown was gold, and his robe was adorned with diamonds and pearls. The Sea King looked kindly upon her and said, "Do not fear me. I mean you no harm. I never desired a true sacrifice. I only wished to humble the proud merchant, so I demanded a task I thought impossible. Yet your filial devotion and pure heart made it possible. Now you shall dwell here in peace for a year. Teach my sea maidens the ways of your world. When that year ends, you shall return to your own land and receive the happiness you deserve." She listened in wonder, and when he finished, she gladly agreed to stay in the palace for a year, teaching all that she knew. Thus she spent 12 months in the underwater kingdom, living joyfully among the sea folk. Though their ways were strange, she was so kind and gentle that she soon became beloved by all. When the year was over, the Sea King summoned her and said, "Sim Chung, you have served faithfully and with devotion. Now it is time for you to return to the world above. But there are many dangers there, and you will have no one to protect you. So I have had a great flower prepared for you. Its petals will close around you, hiding you from all eyes. They will also provide you with food and drink, keeping you safe until fate brings you a husband who loves and protects you." Then he led her into another chamber and showed her the flower. It was large and rose pink, made of soft, delicate material that shone faintly. Its fragrance was heavenly, and the nectar sweet as honey. She cried out in delight and wonder, unable to find words to express her amazement. The king bade her step inside. As soon as she entered, the petals folded gently around her, enclosing her completely. A soft, soothing melody began to play from within, and slowly the flower rose upward, floating toward the surface. It passed through the palace roof, then up through the sea until it emerged upon the waves, drifting peacefully, rocking with the rhythm of the ocean. It so happened that the place where the flower floated was not far from the palace of a young king. One morning, as the flower rose to the surface of the sea, the king stood by his window, gazing across the waters towards a small island where he often went for recreation. Suddenly, between himself and the island, he saw something bright glimmering in the sunlight upon the waves. Unable to guess what it was, he ordered some of his attendants to take a boat, row towards it, and bring it back if possible. They obeyed, and when they returned, they carried with them the great flower, which they laid before the king. The king had been waiting eagerly for their return, and when he saw the flower, he was astonished. Never in his life had he seen anything so large, beautiful, or radiant. He examined it from every side and said, "This must be the work of magic, for no ordinary flower could be
like this. A special room shall be made for it. If it truly is magic, perhaps one day it will bear a fruit even more wondrous than itself." A room was built, the finest in the entire palace. Its walls were of gold, hung with embroidered silk curtains and adorned with paintings. The floor was set with jewels, and fountains played sweetly around cushioned alcoves. From the ceiling hung 7 great lamps of white marble, which glowed day and night. When the chamber was finished, the flower was brought in and carefully placed on a velvet-covered pedestal in the center. No one but the king himself was allowed to enter. The key, strung on a chain of diamonds, hung always around his neck. Every 2 hours, he came to admire the flower's beauty, breathe its delicate perfume, and listen to the soft melody that sometimes floated from within its petals. All this while, Sim Chung lived hidden inside the flower, The king never suspected that a living maiden lay within its folds. By day, the petals were tightly closed. Only at night did they open, giving Sim Chung the freedom to step out and explore. The first time the petals parted, she was amazed to find herself not in the sea, but in a richly furnished room. Trembling, she stepped out and looked around in wonder. The beauty of the place filled her with joy. She rested upon the soft cushions, bathed in the fountain's water, and combed her hair. But when morning came, she re-entered the flower, and once again the petals closed around her. So her life passed for many days, asleep by day, awake by night. The king, who only visited during daylight, never saw her nor dreamed that within the flower lived a human being. One night, however, the king could not sleep. Feeling restless, he decided to go and gaze upon the flower by lamplight. He went silently down the corridor, inserted the key into the lock, and stepped inside. To his amazement, he saw not an empty room, but a beautiful maiden sitting beside the fountain, playing with the water. Sim Chung looked up, saw the king, and cried out in fright. She was about to flee back into the flower when the king gently called, "Do not fear. I will not harm you. Only tell me, who are you, and how came you here? Surely you must be a fairy, for no mortal could possess such beauty." "I am no spirit or fairy," Sim Chung replied softly. "I am the daughter of a blind beggar, and I do not know how I came here." Then she told him her whole story, how her father lost his sight, how she offered herself as a sacrifice to the sea spirit, and how she was placed within this enchanted flower. The young king listened in astonishment. "Your tale is truly wonderful," he said. "And that cruel official who wronged your father shall be punished as he deserves. Perhaps all the words of fate are true. Perhaps you were indeed destined to rise to the highest rank in the land." Then he added, "Sim Chung, I love you. My greatest wish is to make you my queen." Hearing this, Sim Chung's heart was filled with joy. The young king was kind and noble, and his words were gentle. Just as he had fallen in love with her, she too felt deep affection for him. They sat together all night, talking tenderly. When morning came, the king opened the door, led her forth, and summoned all his nobles and courtiers. Standing before them, he declared, "This is my bride." There was great rejoicing throughout the land. All who saw Sim Chung were dazzled by her beauty and charmed by her gracious heart. Soon after, the king and Sim Chung were married in a splendid ceremony, and the people celebrated for many days. Though she was happy with her loving husband, Sim Chung could not forget her blind father. Immediately after her wedding, she sent messengers to her village to search for him, but he had vanished, and no one knew his fate. So the queen arranged a great feast, proclaiming throughout the kingdom that all blind and poor people were to come to the palace to eat and be honored. Every blind man was to be welcomed kindly, and none turned away. Crowds of beggars and blind men arrived, and tables were set with rich food. The young king and queen sat on a throne at one end of the hall, watching as each guest passed before them. Sim Chung gazed eagerly at every blind man, hoping to find her father, but he did not appear. At last, when all were seated and the servants were about to close the doors, an old blind beggar stumbled into the hall, weak and trembling. With great difficulty he reached the throne, and the queen recognized him at once. Crying aloud, she rushed down and threw her arms around him. "My father, it is I, your daughter, Sim Chung." Hearing her voice, the old man trembled. "My child, I thought you were dead, but you live. These arms that hold me are indeed my daughter's." Tears of joy streamed down his face. As they fell, they washed away the mist of blindness, and suddenly he found that he could see again. There was great celebration throughout the palace. The king warmly welcomed the old man, calling him father, and showered him with gifts and honors granting him a high position in the court. The words once spoken by the cruel officer, words no one had believed, were now proven true. Sim Chung had indeed risen to the highest place in the land. So the story has a deep lesson that true devotion never sinks. It rises brighter than the morning sun.